Welcome back to Tech Tech. I'm Adam Housley in Los Angeles. You know, last week we learned about this new technology based on geckos that NASA is developing along with JPL and Stanford University that basically is meant to grab things in space, specifically space junk. Well, right now, which is what we were worried about for the most people that are dealing with the space and what's going on up there in space, we have to deal with the situation. There's a lot of threats out there towards our satellites and a lot of other communications and important satellites and the such in space. So what is NASA and the European Space Agency doing? Well, they're using nets to help fish to get some of this junk out of the way. Here to talk about it is, of course, our war games columnist and defense specialist, Allison Barrie. She's live for us in New York. Her article is up right now on foxnews.com about what's going on in space and trying to get the junk out. Space nets aimed to capture threats to satellites and spacecraft. I mean, this is pretty crazy stuff. It's like you're out in the ocean just trying to bring in a bunch of fish. But in this case, you're bringing in a bunch of junk that potentially could cause some havoc for not only us here in the U.S., but for others around the world.
Right. I love this story, Adam, because I learned along the way that the net is even older than the wheel. So it's one of our oldest pieces of technology, but reinvented. This is a space-age net for our generation. And as you touched on, the threat of space junk is real. It might sound silly, but it really is very real. NASA estimates there are at least 17,000 objects up there the size of a coffee cup. Now, why does this matter? Because even something the size of a 1 centimeter screw up there can have the impact of a hand grenade on our assets. So that could be military satellites, it could be commercial satellites, and God forbid it's our manned efforts up there, our exploration efforts, whether it's the International Space Station or our space taxis going back and forth. It's a very serious threat. In fact, talking to some of my astronaut friends, they told me that even just a speck up there, a speck of paint, a paint fleck, if you will, can cause damage to windows. They've had to replace windows because the incredible speed they're traveling up there, these things that are floating around our space junk, can go up to approximately 17,500 miles. So that velocity can cause really disproportionate consequences.
Yeah, what's interesting, too, is you mentioned the space junk of being 17,000 or so. That's not counting all the active satellites and stuff that's meant to work. So you add that into the mix, yes. You're talking about thousands upon thousands upon thousands. So it's tough enough making sure that those don't run into each other, I'm sure, let alone adding some of this stuff into it. That's
a really great point, Adam, because, for example, I'll just use recent history. Russia had a defunct satellite in 2009 that collided with an Iridium, sorry, I'm having one of those tongue twister days, Iridium commercial satellite, and that resulted in a couple thousand pieces at least of additional space debris up there. So once there's one collision, it can have sort of a chain reaction and create an even worse debris field up there. And it's really serious stuff. I mean, clearly it would impact our military if there was problems up there, but also it affects all of us in our everyday life. People might not realize, but we rely on satellites for television, for GPS navigation, for weather. I could go on and on. So they really do provide a very crucial role to us in our day-to-day lives.
You know, so last week we learned a story that we did here out of Los Angeles that this gecko technology could potentially be used to grab stuff, but that's going to be a few years down the road. Nets, obviously, as you mentioned, are one of the oldest forms of invention that's been used in the world's history. How's this thing going to work? When are they going to get it up there? Give us some details on it.
Right. So I'd love to hear about that gecko net. I'm going to have to check out your story. That sounds really interesting. There are a couple other options that people have been talking about. A harpoon, which is pretty cool, as well as an ion beam. So there's some really cool concepts being evolved out there. The net, in my perspective, is the most promising, particularly given our news this week. The European Space Agency announced that they had lots of really phenomenal success testing the nets recently in weightless conditions. It was really cool how they did it, Adam. They used Canada's Falcon 20, and they did parabolic loops up there so that when they were sort of falling through the sky, it created those weightless conditions so they could test what it would be like in genuine space sort of orbit conditions. So we have really great video that people can check out. It kind of helps to study it, but we actually have video where they show capturing a satellite in these weightless conditions with the net.
Wow, very cool. And this will go into effect when? How soon can they start using this?
Well, there's a 2020-21 space mission that the European Space Agency is planning on, so it's a little bit farther down the road. But based on the results this week, it looks like the net is already successful. So the idea is that that mission's going to go up there to try to clean space. It has a clean space mission, and they're going to try to sort of lasso or wrangle a really massive object. We talked about some of the smaller ones, but what I didn't mention was there's stuff up there that is massive, like massive, massive. So they're going to try to tackle one of these massive objects to the tune of 4,000 kilos. So that's, Adam, your math is way better than mine, but I'm thinking almost 10,000 pounds. So a really big piece of space junk they're going to try to lasso and pull to safety. So it'll either be dragged, hopefully with the net, because I'm a little partial to these little guys, with the net into our atmosphere or to a safe distance out in further space beyond the low Earth orbit mark.
Sounds good. All right, if you want to find out more about the space net to grab junk in space, you can go to foxnews.com. Allison's article is there. You can learn more about what's going on. Space nets aim to capture threats to satellites and spacecraft. You also can find out links to other articles and other technologies she's talked about here on foxnews.com. Appreciate you joining us from New York, Allison.
Thanks for having me, Adam.
All right, I'm Adam Housley in Los Angeles, and you're watching Tech Take.